So, good afternoon. Can I just check before we begin that people online can hear me? Can I get a thumbs up? Great. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Jan. Good. Okay, you can hear me. Lovely. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for coming along today for our annual review of NHS Highland. He says as the clicker works. There we go. So I'm Sarah Compton-Bishop. I am the chair of the board of NHS Highland, and I'm delighted to have you here today, both online and in person, for our annual review. Before I get into my presentation, I want to thank all the people who've engaged with this process. So people who have travelled far and wide to be here in person, people who are joining us online, thank you very much for making the time, and people who have engaged with us this morning. So we had a number of meetings this morning with clinical colleagues and with staff side and patient and carer reps as well. We also have had a number of questions and contributions ahead of the meeting, and hopefully we'll get some time to go through those later on in this session. I am delighted that we're here in Argyll and Bute. We know that NHS Highland covers a huge area. It's impossible to get everywhere, but it's nice to be able to move around a little bit. And I'd like to say thank you to members of the board who have this morning taken the time to do some visits to various services and partner organisations this morning. So I hope that that was a worthwhile experience. So I'm going to take us through a presentation, and then we can open up if there are any questions, but we also have questions that people have submitted ahead of time that we will go through. Anything that we don't have time to do this afternoon, because we had quite a lot of questions submitted ahead of time, so if we don't get a chance to go through them all, we will make sure that those questions and responses go up on the website as well, so that people can see the responses. So just a bit of background. Anybody who watched our review last year, we spent quite a lot of time setting the scene and talking about the context and the challenge. So I won't go into as much detail as we did last year, but just a bit of a recap. We cover a massive area, and in fact so massive that we couldn't actually even quite fit it all in the graphic there. So from Campbelltown to Caithness, the largest of the territorial boards in Scotland. So it will be no surprise that we cover a lot of different communities, a huge range of services, and I can't cover it all today, that would be impossible, but we can give a snapshot of some of the things that we do, how we're performing, some of the challenges, and some of the things that we're doing well. It will be an opportunity for us to look back at the year that we've just experienced, and also to take a look into the future as well. So the two challenges that we probably talk about the most in NHS Highland are our very large and sometimes tricky geography, but also the demographics. So hopefully people can see the chart that's up on the screen. And this really visually shows you that demographic challenge that we grapple with. Now, of course, we're seeing that across Scotland, but it's even more pronounced in the NHS Highland and Argyll and Bute area. So if you look at that graph, the blue line that goes down represents the number of under 16s in our population. And we've mapped that out. So the beginning of the chart starts at 1982, and we've done some projections to take that into 2042. The orange line shows the number of over 65. So you can see how that goes up. So it doesn't take too much explaining, so you can see how the number of people who are going to require care as they move into older age is increasing, and the number of people in a working age is coming down. And we see that reflected not just in the population that we serve, but of course within our staff groups and our teams as well. So there are some stats up there, but just to draw your attention, almost a third of our colleagues are over 55. So that presents a challenge for us now, but it presents a risk for us into the future as well. 60% of our teams are what we would call a small team. So that means 5 or less people in the team in the same job category. And of those small teams, 23.8% of them are entirely made up of members of staff who are over 55. So you can see that that presents a vulnerability for us. So we do deliver a massive range and diversity of services, and almost everyone, if not everybody, living in Argyll and Bute and the Highlands will come into contact with a service either that we provide directly or that we commission others to do every single year. And it's not just the ones that you might think of immediately. We've got obviously your inpatients and your outpatients, but primary care and social care, care at home, care homes, diagnostics, research, mental health services, surgery. And here are just a few snapshots of how we perform. Now, as an organisation, the NHS is awash with data. So we've just picked out a few points that show there are areas where we do phenomenally well and see huge numbers of people coming through our services and receiving really good care. And there are areas where we don't see the performance or the quality that we would like to see, and we've got work to do to improve that. And some numbers there, in fact, just to draw your attention, the number there for clients receiving care at home, that figure up there is just for North Highland, but of course in Argyll and Bute we deliver that in partnership through the HSCP, and we're seeing 1,953 hours a week in Argyll and Bute there. And the babies born, that is for Highland and Argyll and Bute. Oh, I went too far. There we go. So it's a large, complex system run by human beings. Here are some other highlights and lowlights. In particular, I suppose I just wanted to talk about two on there. So vaccinations, we know, are one of the most effective public health interventions, but our uptake has been below average, and we have had some challenges in delivering that, and I'll touch on that in a later slide. But I also wanted to recognise some really excellent work that's taken place within our endoscopy team. So we've got a really good position. It's the best of all the mainland boards in Scotland at the moment. But the team have worked incredibly hard and have recently acquired their JAG accreditation. So that's really testimony to the quality of work that they're doing within that team. And we're the only acute endoscopy unit in Scotland to have qualified for that. So that's a really significant achievement. But you can see some of the other areas that we are doing well in, but also challenged by. And some of those will be no surprise. So I want to look in a little bit more detail at some of those achievements and challenges. So our National Treatment Centre has been a really positive addition for us in NHS Highland and indeed for the region. So we know that we are seeing some really good results from our post-occupancy report. So more people from across the north of Scotland are being seen earlier for the operations within the NTC and spending less time in hospital. And we've had some really good feedback from staff and patients regarding the environment that they're working and being treated within. Our adult support and protection is another area of achievement. So we've had some feedback from the joint inspection by the Care Inspectorate and Healthcare Improvement Scotland, and they commended the good communication and information sharing between partners, and they reflected a really strong person-centred approach. They particularly noted things such as our teleconference model and having a nominated officer as being really positive, impactful pieces. We also have had inspection from the Mental Welfare Commission across a number of settings, including HMP Inverness and New Craigs, and they've praised the services for comprehensive record keeping, person-centred and rights-based care. Inspectors met with people receiving the services on their visits, and they've described the positive feedback they have heard, commending the staff and saying how helpful, approachable they were, and that they were treating people with the dignity and respect that we would like to see across our services. But of course, challenges as well. So we are all aware of the budgetary pressures that we were presented with, or rather the Scottish Government presented with, which led to them pausing their capital investment programme. And that was felt across Scotland, and we were no exception. We know that the current capital allocation is just under £7 million, which is not enough to do the required maintenance we have on the list. And of course, there were some significant projects that were impacted by that. We've got the replacement hospital at Belford, for the Belford. We've got the Caithness redesign, the work more locally in Cowell, the Raigmore maternity work, and there are other projects that have been impacted as well. So that's been really challenging for our communities and for our staff who've worked really hard to progress those projects. At the moment, we can only continue to work closely with the Scottish Government and make sure that that work and the efforts of our communities does not go to waste, and that we can progress those when we are instructed to do so. We're focusing on reducing delays to getting people to the most appropriate place for their care. So we might have heard that talked about as being the delayed discharge, and the First Minister has a mission around that to see improvements for people. There are things we're working on in-house to improve that discharge planning process, and we have seen some success. But we are very challenged in terms of our social care provision, our geography, and a number of care homes closing. And I touched earlier on vaccine delivery. So we know that we have had some difficulties there. And again, our geography, our remote and rural locations have an impact on how well we can do that across our whole board area. So we're looking at alternative ways to do that so that we can have flexibility to commission services from GPs and in other ways that make sense locally to make sure that we can get maximum uptake of those vaccines. And we also have some outstanding commitments to fulfil in Skye to sustain the delivery of the urgent care model. And it's thanks to the teams in Portree and across the whole area who've worked really hard to allow us to make Portree Hospital available for urgent care. Another big challenge that people will be familiar with are our finances and our position. So this is a look at the 23-24 position as it was. So you can see the figures there and how we used savings and brokerage to plug that gap. I think it's worth noting though that only 13.5 million of the savings were sustainable cost reductions and improvements, less than half of what we have hoped. So most of those savings were short-term or slippage, which then leads us on to how it looks for 24-25. So you can see there our initial budget gap. You can see what we have planned in savings and efficiencies that we'd like to take forward. But you can also see a slight change. This time round, they've capped the brokerage, which is a slightly different approach, and that's been capped at 28.4 million. So taking that brokerage and the planned savings, you can see that that still leaves us with a gap. So that puts us in a position where we expect to see a deficit. And as at the end of September, we were 23.6 million adrift from the brokerage limit. And that's a really significant pressure and challenge that we're all focused on. This pie chart here shows what we spend on. And you can see those two really big areas, 38% pay, 27% on delivering healthcare, and that's through SLAs or where we have to pay other boards for out of area work. And then you can see the other smaller ones, including clinical goods and services and other goods and services, costs around our property at 4%, drugs and prescribing at 8%, and social care at 9%. And the pressures as well down the side, you can see increasing costs around drugs and prescribing, insufficient funding. We talked earlier about the property maintenance, the non-pay impact, so making the changes to the reduced working week, that has a kind of a wider cost pressure as well. And of course, the risk that funding for adult social care will not be sufficient. So we have a number of areas where we are looking to do things a bit differently to reduce that expenditure and try and close that gap. We do need to make use of new technology and try and reduce admin and travel and do things in different ways. As I said, we cover a massive area, and we need to make best use of those tools so that we're not having to travel all over the place all the time. Doing work around supplementary staffing to try and control that and switch from agency to in-house bank staff. Procurement, so the way we buy things, doing that a little bit differently, and looking through national tendering processes to get the best deal for the things that we need to buy. We do, believe it or not, have some opportunities for income generation. It doesn't naturally feel like something that sits with an NHS, but we do. So we're looking at how we can maximise that as much as possible. And that can sometimes include things like advertising, but also we provide services for patients that are not within our area, and making sure that the processes around that are as they should be. Changing the way, again, I've talked about ordering, but there are some things that we've done specifically around consumables like dressings and things. Rather than ordering it through a prescribing route, we do it through a different route, which is cheaper and gives us better control over our stock to try and reduce the waste. And we've already talked about travel, but there are other things we're doing as well as just reducing travel, is looking at how we travel when we do need to try and make that as cost effective as possible. So that set the scene, but I suppose the important thing for us is the patient experience and the outcomes that our patients get through the services that we provide. We've just taken some snapshots here. Obviously, we get loads of feedback, but we've just picked out a few to give an example. Increasingly, we are looking at how we embed the patient experience and how we embed outcomes in our work. So when we're looking at quality, how well did we do something isn't just about the number of people or how fast we did it. It's about how that was for the person. So we've been looking at how we can capture that feedback and embed it in our work. So we're using a tool called Care Opinion, which is a great tool that people can use to share their experience with us. I've been really emphasising that. And we have seen an increase in patient feedback, which is really good, most of which has been positive. And that positive feedback is higher this year than it was last year. But we do get things wrong sometimes, and it's important that we can hear about that as well and take the learning from it through our quality improvement work, which is what I'm going to talk about now. So we don't just embed that patient experience to look back and think about how we've done. Did we do a good job, and how was it for the person? But we also use it to inform improvement work and things that we want to do differently in the future. I've got a couple of examples that I'd like to talk about. So we had some feedback from patients and staff in an inpatient mental health ward, and that got us to thinking about how to do things a bit differently, and we launched a pilot for an activity coordinator, and that's had fantastic results. We didn't just use the feedback from patients, we triangulated that with information we'd had from the Mental Welfare Commission and an environment review. And that allowed patients to have many more opportunities to undertake different activities, and that really helped with their sense of identity, their competence. They were less distressed, more motivated, and generally improved their outcomes. We had feedback from a patient around breast cancer treatment and adapting that to be more trauma informed, and that's been rolled out across teams so that colleagues can understand and recognise trauma and ensure patients can access the treatment and examinations in a supportive and empathetic environment, and that's been a really good thing to hear about. And we also did a piece of quality improvement work around recording pressure area care, and there was some really interesting learning there. So using that feedback from patients, we identified that there was a lack of staff confidence in that particular area, and some ad hoc training was developed and rolled out to address that, and that had good results. And we also had we had some feedback around how we reduce waste, so we've taken that forward as well. So it's really broad ranging how we can use that feedback to improve our quality. So I want to talk a little bit about health inequalities. So we are still seeing in the Highlands and Argyll area, we are still seeing a big gap in life expectancy. So women who live in better off areas within our area are living an average of 13 years longer than those living in the more deprived areas. And for men, that gap is 18 years. So that is significant. And we talk a lot about reducing health inequalities, but it's important to recognise that access to health services is just one part of that. And there's a few graphics on the screen there showing the many different determinants that contribute to how well and how healthy somebody is and how they live. And we can't do that alone. Now, there are some things that we can do, which I'm going to talk about next. So within NHS Highland, recognising that those inequalities are not going away and that we need to tackle them, we know that prevention is key in that. And our public health team have been leading and supporting on that work. And the work there covers, again, a really broad range of things. So, for example, we have our money counts training. So that's courses for our staff who work with people who might be dealing with money worries. And there are different levels of that training that staff can access, whether it be a brief kind of touch point conversation, something a little bit more in depth, and then moving into poverty informed practice. So a better understanding of poverty and the stigma that comes with that. We have our community link workers, which has been a hugely positive element of the work. So targeting patients that would benefit most from non-medical support. So between May 2023 and April 2024, we had 1,535 referrals and 23.3 of the patients living in 20% of the most deprived areas. So patients through that service are referred for lots of different things: mental well-being, loneliness, isolation, money worries, challenges with their housing, things that can affect somebody's health and well-being in the broadest sense. They're being offered a person-centred assessment and support to identify what's important to their well-being and to access community-based activities and services to help them improve their health and well-being. And we also did a piece around breast screening telephone reminder. So sounds fairly simple and straightforward, but it's a targeted telephone reminder and support intervention for women invited for their first breast screen appointment. And that's to support an increased participation and reduce screening inequalities across the deprivations. As I said, we can't do that alone. There's a lot of things that we can do, but thinking back to that slide with all the different determinants for health and well-being, we know that working in partnership is so important to improving the health and well-being of our communities. So we've had to think about how is that for us and how is it for our partners? And we have a range of different partnerships. And they have different sizes and shapes. So the ones that probably everybody will be familiar with is our partnerships with our local authorities, so Argyll and Bute Council and the Highland Council, with our two very different models of integration to deliver health and social care throughout our communities. But we also work with the third sector, charities, community groups of all shapes and sizes. And we do that in different ways. We sometimes commission third sector organisations to deliver services for us. Sometimes it's less formal and it's more of a collaborative space that we work with them. And we also have partnerships around our community planning partnership arrangements. So people like the police and the fire service sit in that space as well. So just a couple of kind of partnership pieces that I wanted to draw people's attention to. Our welfare and health partnerships, which has been funded by the Improvement Service since March 2025, is a partnership between ourselves and the Highland Council welfare team and targeted GP practices. And the service provides dedicated welfare advice to patients in remote and rural areas. And to date, we've seen referrals from 8 practices, so 61 patients referred, with annualised gains of over £100,000. We can talk a little bit about medication assisted treatment, so MAT, as people might know it, and the custody toolkit. So that was an innovative approach to proactively identify people in custody who are at risk of drug-related deaths and offer some health intervention. We've seen small increases in treatment, testing and referrals, but importantly, there's been a lot of learning from that for us to take forward. We also, within our Highland Community Planning Partnership, promoted the suicide prevention app, which saw an increase in usage. And doing that, we were working with charities, so Mikey's Line and the Samaritans, you can see up on the screen there, to educate partners and the media in how to report and communicate about suicide. We've also been involved in projects through the Argyll and Bute Community Planning Partnership, including supporting community groups to tackle drug and alcohol misuse and developing a strategy to combat climate change. Our Living Well programme board in Argyll and Bute is a multi-agency group which is hosted by the HSCP and has developed the Living Well programme, which includes funding wellbeing coaches. And this will evolve into a social enterprise model to ensure sustainability. In fact, we had some really positive feedback earlier this morning from our engagement with patients and carers reps around the Living Well network, which was really reassuring. So we know that the way we deliver health and care is changing, and it has to change for it to be sustainable. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how we are going to see services delivered locally and regionally and nationally. We want to provide care for people as close to their homes as possible, and that feels really important, especially when you're living rurally or on an island. That feels really, really key. That principle particularly applies to social care and primary care, as well as, of course, prevention work to try and keep people in Argyll and Bute and the Highlands healthy and well. But we also know that to make sure services are sustainable, that sometimes that needs to be done in specialist centres, and those might be regional or national. So, for example, there is a piece of work around neonatal design, and that's happening nationally. And that will see care for the smallest and most unwell babies concentrated in 3 centres nationally, so Edinburgh, Glasgow, and Aberdeen. We know that some of our specialist services, like oncology, can't recruit the permanent specialists we need. So that leaves us reliant on locums and vulnerable to absence and leave and sickness. So we need to reflect best practice, which means that at times for some services, we will have very specialist services serving a larger population. And that means that those practitioners can retain their unique skills. There's been new planning with people guidance from Healthcare Improvement Scotland, and that sets out how boards should engage with people for different types of service change, including that which is determined nationally. That's something that we are cited on and we'll think about through our engagement with communities going forward. So we've talked about all the work that we do across a very big area for lots of people, and we couldn't do any of that without our staff. So how was it for our staff? And of course, when we talk about our staff, I don't just mean the people we employ directly. I mean our contractors, our partners, and also our volunteers, all the people that help us deliver the services that we do. So we have seen in 23-24 the introduction of our Values in Practice Staff Award. So that is a new way of recognising teams and individuals who have really demonstrated our values in action. We've seen some big moves forward in improving and supporting an improved culture, but we know that there are still challenges. Any organisation as large and complex as NHS Highland, employing thousands of staff over a huge geography, is likely to encounter microcultures and a really wide range of staff experiences, especially when we consider the pressures that people are working under. So we will always have work to do to ensure that everybody working for NHS Highland, whether as a member of staff or a contractor, feels listened to, included and valued. Staff wellbeing and promoting openness and psychological safety to speak up are really important to NHS Highland, to me, to Fiona, to the board. We will continue to promote different ways of speaking up. There are lots of different routes to do that. That might be business as usual, raising through line management, but we also know there are other ways to do that as well. We've got a really active trade union representation. We've got confidential contact through the Guardian service. And of course, we've got our whistleblowing champion, Bert, and other ways to raise those concerns. And we'll have to keep doing that to make sure that people are aware of the wellbeing support and different ways to speak up. We also have our employee assistance programme and, of course, our occupational health colleagues to support staff as well. Towards the end of 23-24, we started a really substantial piece of work on staff engagement. So that was looking at themes from our iMatter staff survey and other data that we have available to us, and doing a bit of a deep dive around that, with online engagement and in-person sessions to find out more about what people were feeling dissatisfied with in the organisation and thinking about how we could remedy that. So that's going to come back in a report in early 2025, and we're going to turn that into an action plan so that there are tangible things that we can take forward to improve that. And we've got a big piece of work ongoing at the moment to develop our equality, diversity and inclusion strategy, and that's going to include our anti-racism plan, setting up staff forums, promoting training and education. Our staff wellbeing strategy is also going to launch in the new year, and that brings together existing and new strands of work to support colleagues. We've also looked a little bit beyond just our own board. We've been working jointly with Grampian on a North of Scotland recruitment campaign. Of course, we're not the only board that struggles to recruit, so it's interesting to take a slightly more regional approach to that. And of course, when we think about those recruitment challenges, if you think back to the slide around demographics, but there's also how we have to compete with other industries in the area. And we know that other industries struggle for workforce in some of our rural and island areas. So we're not alone, but we're thinking about different ways to do that. We also have seen changes for staff through the non-pay elements. So the Agenda for Change work around reducing the working week, protected time, band 5 reviews for nurses and other staff. Lots of changes happening around the workforce, and that all needs development and impacts the whole kind of workforce shape and the overall cohort that's available. So we really need to think about a new approach where we shape our services to the staff that we have and the staff that we will have in the future, and those that we can afford to recruit and are available. So there's significant workforce planning underway. So as I bring us to a close, it's nice to finish on a positive. So looking ahead, it's easy to focus on the challenges and the pressures, but there is so much good work going on and lots of innovation and new ideas coming through the system. And of course, I've talked a lot about performance and finance and staff, but there's also the sustainability and environmental agenda, which is really important to us as well. We need to make sure that as we're designing services for the future, they are sustainable in all senses of the word. And I just wanted to touch on a few really good pieces of work that have happened around that. So we've had our pure water filtration plant at Regmore Laundry. So that's some really innovative equipment that filters the microplastics and pharmaceuticals from the water, and that would normally be drained away and end up in the ocean. So that's been a really positive piece of work. The water that leaves the laundry would now be drinkable, so that's a big change. We have seen a solar-powered electric vehicle charger in Regmore car park. So we repurposed an old shipping container, would you believe it? And that can charge up to 12 electric vehicles on a fast charge. And that uses solar power supplemented by grid power when required to make sure that that charging is fluid. So that was the first of its kind to be installed in Scotland, and it's been nominated for a National Healthcare Finance Award, and that's in December, I think, the award ceremony. We also had chargers installed at Stadium Road, the RNI, John O'Drockett, Aston House, Slate and Staffin surgeries as well. So lots of work around that. We know that we need to use technology and innovation to find new ways to deliver services more efficiently. And one of the things that we're doing, which I think is really exciting, is piloting drone flights between Isla and Jura, where I live, for delivering medicine. So that's been very exciting. And AI. So all the kids are using it, and we're using it too. So that has opportunities for us and for future healthcare delivery. And so we're exploring that alongside partners, and we're including the University of Aberdeen in that. Just one example, we have a library of images from an AI supported image analysis in a large bowel camera capsule endoscopy. So using AI to analyze images and help with that diagnostic process. So that's a really understandable way of how we can use AI, but there are lots and lots of different ways. So we know that going forward, we can use all of these opportunities, and we need to continue to work with communities. We need to find new models of care and work with people locally so that people who need care and support can stay in their own homes for longer. We have a great relationship with our volunteers, and we could see that expanding. We know that volunteering in the NHS is a hugely rewarding experience. So that's something that we can look at. And we also want to work more in partnership with charities. And there's in fact a pilot of nature prescriptions working alongside the RSPB, which is one example. And there are many more that we can explore. So I'll close it there on those positive examples of good things that are happening. And I just want to take this opportunity to say a massive thank you to all of our staff, our contractors, our partners, our communities. We absolutely can't do this on our own, and we're not doing it on our own. And I think that the work that goes on is phenomenal. So a big thank you to everybody who pulls on the same end of the rope. Okay, I will. We're doing time. Okay. So we have some questions which were submitted in the lead up to this. Now, what we've done is we had lots of different questions coming in, and we've sort of grouped them because some of the questions were very similar or along the same lines. So we what we've done is we've kind of grouped them together and reworded them into one question to kind of cover the whole topic. So I don't know shall I read the questions out and then we do it that way? We've got some questions around integrated services first up. So there are kind of 4 questions. I'll maybe just read them all out and then it might come together in sort of one lovely coherent answer. So does NHS Highland consider it is addressing adequately the quality of life for patients in delayed discharge from hospital and on care at home packages? Question 1. Question 2. How many people are waiting on adult social care assessments in the NHS Highland area? 3 is how will NHS Highland mitigate against market forces in using private care providers, and what is being done to address the shortage of placements in rural communities? And 4, what is NHS Highland doing to ensure quality of access to community nursing, social and allied health professional care, and how will you maintain and improve access, particularly for people in rural areas? I think we've got Pam and or Evan. I don't know who wants to go first. We've got a kind of a combined
each in regard to the parts
Yeah.
area.
Okay, I'm going to let Evan go first because we're on Argyll and Bute.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to be here. So if I can talk a little bit about the work within Argyll and Bute Health and Social Care Partnership around delayed discharge and that kind of quality infrastructure around that. So the first point to make is that within Argyll and Bute we remain committed to delivering on the national mission of reducing delayed discharge. We know tonight there'll be around 37 people in our hospitals who could be at home, and that's never a good place to be. In a national context, that places us around the national average. And in relation to the specific around social work assessments, there are 7 people awaiting adult social care assessments from a discharge perspective. That's about 15% of all patients in delay, although those assessments are currently within the national timescale on average. To talk first about the kind of quality bit of what how we're supporting people who are in hospital who could be in a different setting and supporting some of those elements of deconditioning. Let's say patient choice and control is really central to our approach, and we're clear on that the needs and well-being of our patients is central to our assessment and care management processes. And the focus on re-ablement maximising independence at every stage is core to that approach. Our planning centres around the implementation of discharge to assess pathways as a core part of our integrated discharge model. And we also want to support those people who are in our hospitals. So recent initiatives have focused on support from our volunteers within our ward environments, and a meaningful activity programme which supports patients to stay active and connected within our hospital spaces. It would be very remiss of me not to mention our wonderful campaign led by one of our physio leads as part of the hashtag End PJ Paralysis campaign. And that's get up, get dressed, and get moving. So it's encouraging people to make sure that that really core block of reducing deconditioning around getting up and getting dressed is experience in our hospitals. In terms of the question around market forces, we have a stakeholder group in place with our care providers. That's a really important part of our picture and our provision, and that ensures that we're jointly working on areas of pressure. And we also meet regularly with providers in an operational setting to make sure that the flow of patients and clients through our system is one that's coordinated and done in partnership. In terms of the question around access to community nursing and AHPs, that's really central to our model of integration, where teams work together to plan the care required for patients and clients in an integrated way and make sure that holistic assessment is done, care is provided by the most appropriate professional. There's more work to do there, and embedding that is part of our integrated discharge model that I mentioned. There's also a digital first element to that, making sure that we make the best use of technologies to ensure patients get the right access. I'd also just draw attention to the work we've been doing on our island strategy within Argyll and Bute, recognising that the care we provide to inhabitants of 23 islands is a really important part of what we do. And it's not necessarily about the inputs and the access to specific services and professions. It's about working with each island to understand what the best outcomes are and making sure we work in a co-production way to provide that. I'll stop there and pass.
Thanks, Evan. That's great. And I'll get you to switch your microphone off, and then Pam can put hers on. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm Pamela Cremen. I'm the Chief Officer for the Highland Health and Social Care Partnership of the board area. So currently in Highland, and we've got quite an active and daily changing list of data. So at the time of providing the answer to the question, we had 39 people waiting on a care at home placement, but 32 people waiting for social care assessment. And when I say waiting, that means that they're at different stages of a process in terms of their assessment, and that involves working with the multidisciplinary team and the integrated teams across 9 districts in Highland to really be engaged with our sector partners and looking at our capacity and our workforce to obtain the solutions for people. So we completely recognise the issues around the quality of life for people who are waiting, and some of the areas of concern that places on individuals and their families. So as well as working within our partnership on solutions, we're also engaged nationally through our national colleagues where we learn from other systems, and we've developed a 90-day improvement plan where we're looking at all of our work streams where we can add value, and then we are working on our joint strategic plan where home is best and we want to develop our services in the community. We've also been doing some very active work on looking at the capacity within our system. So looking at the placements that we have available in care homes, working with our sector partners to make sure that we maximise those as much as possible, and working collaboratively across that sector as well in terms of our recruitment challenges. So making sure that we're all working in in the same areas to develop workforce, to look at new roles and to staff our capacity so that we can meet that demand and that solutions for people who are waiting in our systems.
Thank you, Pam. That's great. And just remember, we will put these answers up on the website as well, so that all the information will be there for people to see online. I'm going to go to a question about rheumatology next. So the question that we've had in, how can a long-suffering patient get speedier access to rheumatology? What is NHS Highland's response to a suggestion of paying privately to see an NHS rheumatologist to speed up access to care? And I'm going to ask Catherine to respond to that, please.
Thank you. I'm Catherine Sutton, Chief Officer for Acute Services. So we, as an organisation, have been challenged in terms of our waiting times, particularly as a result of the capacity that we lost through the pandemic. And we have been actively working with Scottish Government in terms of the potential for additional capacity to be sourced through that route, particularly in the case of rheumatology for outpatient access. We do have a mechanism in place where GPs can contact directly into secondary care and discuss through a system called clinical dialogue, which really speeds up the access for patients that are on those pathways. When any referral comes into the service, there is a triage process, and the clinicians will review and assess what their clinical priority to see patients would be. We recognise that as a result of some of the longer waiting times, patients' conditions can change over time, and there is a potential for escalation should that change. So patients can contact through their GP or directly into service once they've had a referral made. We're working very closely with the Centre for Sustainable Delivery to reduce waiting times and ensure that we're as efficient as we possibly can be. And we have introduced processes that look at waiting list validation to ensure that absolutely every single patient that is on their waiting list absolutely needs to be there. We've also looked at workforce because some of our biggest challenge is access to consultant workforce. And so we have a development of specialist nurses within the rheumatology service that supports the consultant workforce to deliver the service. In terms of the question around private practice, that we certainly can offer an opportunity for our consultants to practice privately within the NHS, but it does rely on our consultants wishing to take up that opportunity. And because of the shortage of capacity and the volume of patients on the waiting list in our rheumatology service at the moment, our consultants don't feel they're able to do that because of the workload pressures on them. We also have opportunity for patients to contact our feedback teams. If they feel they're not getting the right access through service, they can contact feedback team, and that escalates either to myself through service management or sometimes directly to the chief executive. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Catherine. I'll get you to just do that. That's great. Thank you. Okay, changing topic now. We're going to take a question about strategy and working with communities. So the question is, what resources and plans do NHS Highland have to meet your strategic commitment to work with communities to co-commission and co-produce services? A great question, and I'm going to ask Alison to take this, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm Alison McGrory, Associate Director for Public Health, covering Argyll and Bute. I really welcome this question. Co-production, I think, for some of us still remains jargon, but for a member of the public to raise that question, I think it shows how sighted we are on the importance of this. And Chair, you talked about the social determinants of health, and we can only lever and improve those social determinants of health by working in a co-productive way with our community members. So co-production is effectively how we as a statutory provider work on an equal basis with all of our stakeholders. So that includes people who use our services, unpaid carers, our third sector partners, and all of our communities, including our staff. This happens to be National Co-Production Week in Scotland this week. So again, it's very timely that this question has been raised. And the national campaign behind that week are launching a toolkit this week. And I think for me, I've come up to my role in terms of public health as a health improver, and you can't do health improvement without working in partnership with communities. You can't do to communities, you have to do with communities. So I think coming back to that point in terms of how we upskill our staff so that co-production isn't a word that's jargon and we don't understand what that means collectively as a board. So I welcome the work of the National Co-Production Campaign and that toolkit, and we will ensure that that's shared across all levels of the organisation. And I think for me in the role that I have now, it's about that influence that we can bring in terms of co-production. Yes, sometimes it takes a bit more time to work in that way, but we know by championing these approaches that we will get better outcomes from that. And really that's what we have to do in terms of the rising demands, in terms of people waiting for our services and more ill health in the population. We're really duty bound to work in this transformative way. We have guidance that helps us to work towards that in terms of planning with people. And again, Chair, you touched on that in your presentation. That planning with people guidance was updated this year. And I think we're very cited on that in terms of the leadership round about communications and engagement. Often engagement and communication gets grouped together. They are quite distinct but overlapping terms. So you can't go out and engage effectively with communities without telling them the reasons why. So it's really important that public health and people who've got an interest in this approach are working alongside our communications function within the board. If I can take 1 or 2 more minutes, perhaps the best examples that I'm aware of in terms of how we currently embrace these types of approaches within NHS Highland are within our alcohol and drug partnerships and via our carers strategy. So again, these are really big societal issues in terms of lots of people experiencing alcohol and drug problems and the social determinants that underpin that and the political nature of that in terms of drug problems. And there's, I think it's fair to say, across all of health and social care, this is one area where there is a bit of money, and it's really important that we as custodians of that money, it's not our money as a board, but it's money that we use to improve health and wellbeing outcomes for alcohol and drugs. And we've got really good examples across both partnerships of where we do work effectively in a co-productive way and co-commission our services. And that sort of live finger on the pulse in terms of what local people want in their communities. So I think that's probably exemplar in terms of our approach in NHS Highland and also the recent work around about the carer strategy.
That's great. Thank you, Alison. Okay, and I now have a question which I have lost. That page, thank you. Around adult neurodevelopmental pathways. So the question is, what progress has NHS Highland made to build service capacity and improve experiences for adults with neurodevelopmental differences? And when will your website include more helpful information on the subject? Now, we've got 2 answers. So I'm going to ask Evan and Pam again to pick this one up. Evan, I'll let you go first, please.
Thank you, Chair. And is that okay? I didn't introduce myself last time. Evan Beswick, Chief Officer for Argyll and Bute Health and Social Care Partnership. In Argyll and Bute Health and Social Care Partnership, we're continuing to work towards developing a neurodiversity strategy for Argyll and Bute. And that's guided by the Learning Disabilities, Autism and Neurodivergence Bill consultation documents and the National Autism Implementation Team report, the NAIT as it's often referred to. And what that has required us to do is develop a strategic approach and also develop a group within the partnership to start to examine and improve pathways to make sure they are as tailored towards neurodiversity as possible. So we've got that group set up within Argyll and Bute as per the recommendations and are working towards examining our pathways. And within adult services, we've recently recruited an autism diagnostic practitioner and we'll continue to work towards enhancing services.
That's great. Thank you, Evan. And Pam.
Thank you. And just to follow on, similarly, for the Highland Partnership, we're reviewing our ADHD pathways just directly in response to feedback about the services that people would want, and also working on improvements, so looking at the National Association for Integrated Therapies guidelines and making sure that we align with that. So in terms of further engagement, we want to review the pathways. We want to also work with our adult autism assessment pathways and make sure that we develop a single point of access in one service. So in terms of public communication and engagement, then we're going to be working with our communities to co-produce and develop that service as we go forward and engage about the outcomes, and make sure that our staff are trained and aligned to be able to take forward that engagement and outputs of the work.
That's great. Thank you very much. I think that's all the questions, because we've grouped them together to make them more efficient. So those are all the questions that we had in advance. And so I can bring the meeting to a close. And just once again, I would like to thank everybody for their time, and a particular thank you to the staff who've worked behind the scenes to pull this all together. We know that getting everything prepped and organised and taking the board on the road is no small task. So thank you very much to everybody who's put a lot of work into that. It's much appreciated. And this has all been recorded and will be put up online for other people to watch if they haven't had the opportunity to join us live today. So with that, I will bring us to a close, and thank you very much, and safe travels, hopefully not too snowy on the way back to wherever you're going to. Thank you.